you kind of lose out on the album. You lose out on those introspective records that help push the culture. You know, think about the Nas records, like Rewind or the I Gave You Power. You know, some of those records. You know, those weren't necessarily single hits. Those were those album cuts that really helped define an album. Like, wow, did you hear that record? Those are the records that stood the test of time, and you go back to it and you remember it 20 years later because it was so introspective. It was just so different, you know.
When you say that, right? Because just look at how they did that. So if we're taking say Illmatic into consideration, right? You say you have an album cut like New York State of Mind, right? Which is one of the greater album cuts of that starts that album and makes that album really, what it is, right? It sets the tone on that album. I don't think that artists are to make the album cuts as significant as they used. I think before, we knew that you had some songs that stood out to become singles, but I don't think these guys are really taking the craft serious to the point where it's like, okay, we're going to make each album or each song have its own individual value, even though it may not be a single, but have an individual value or replay value. Now, I think, guys are just kind of jumping in and, we made a song, the throwaway songs are the rest of the album. And then I may have 2 or 3 jewels that become the singles, but never really putting the emphasis in making those others really significant. And then also trying to make songs cohesive with the rest of the songs. I think because even though Nas and those albums work with different producers, it's like he had an overall arc that he wanted his album to follow. And he made sure that he got what he needed to get from each producer to make those things intertwine. Right? Because the conversation now is, hey, make one producer do the whole album. And I don't know if that's necessarily better. I think what happens is that the artist has to do a bad match the vision or the theme of the album. And the albums these days just don't have themes. The albums don't have any cohesive messaging. I think the album is just a collection of songs for a lot of these guys, and they're not looking at it like, okay, it's a movie, it's an audio movie. And I think that's what's been missing a lot of times for these things. It's like when you're watching a movie, it has to have the intricacy of a script. Who's the antagonist? What's the antagonist? What's the protagonist? Where does the story go? How does the third act end? And I think that has been removed from music, where I think a lot of the music from our era was built on that, was built on the story arc of an album, of where guys started and where guys ended at the end. So I think I'm not saying that everything has to be a movie, but I am saying that it should tell some sort of story that the listener can ride with you from the beginning to the end, whether it be a Get Rich or Die Trying, whether it be an Aquemini, whether it be a Southern Playlist of Cadillac Music, whether it be The Chronic. You know what I mean? Whether it be College Drop, they have these arcs and they have these beginnings and these endings. And you're just like, wow, what a ride we went on with that.